Chapter 6. "You watched Voyager?" Monica said at last. "Gott in Himmel." It should have been a momentous occasion, to be celebrated ever after with fireworks and a military band, the one and only time there'd been a girl in this room, even if she was really a Volkswagen Polo. But Paul hadn't noticed. All the fatalistic confidence had drained out of him, like oil from a British motorcycle. He was home. Eek! In the main conference room at J.W., there was an enchanted table. It was polished to a mirror finish, and the technical term for it was imp-reflecting. A goblin masquerading as a human or a shape-changer would show up in it as it really was, all teeth and claws and tiny yellow eyes. Maybe the Fae had similar technology, Paul thought, because this room had the exact same effect. They'd unmasked him, caught him out, a stupid little boy pretending to be a grown man in a suit 4 sizes too big for him. This room no longer existed, of course. When his parents had moved to Florida, the house had been sold. Everything that he couldn't fit into 2 suitcases and a dozen supermarket cardboard boxes had gone to the charity shop with a tip. These posters, this duvet, those plastic aeroplanes were long gone, but the room was forever, and he'd never left it. He was trapped in it, forever. "No," Paul said. "Well, yes, the pilot episode and some of the first series, but then I gave up. My mum bought me the poster for Christmas one year, and I had to put it up. Oh, she'd have been hurt." The thought made him shudder. His mother had always been so vulnerable to unintentional slights. The smallest thing could cut her to the quick, and he couldn't bear the thought of hurting her, naturally, so he'd always had to be so careful. Standing here again, surrounded by things he'd hated but put up with for years and years and years and years, he realised, consciously for the first time, that hurt and offence had been his mother's sheepdogs to herd him into the small, sparse pen she'd built for him. His mother's sensitivity and his father's contempt kept in there like chains. "Excuse me," Paul said. "Hello?" At once a small child materialised in front of him. A small boy in scruffy school uniform, shirt-tails trailing, tie askew and tightly knotted, sitting at the desk by the window with an exercise book open in front of him. "Is that you?" Monica whispered. Paul nodded. "When I was 12, he replied. "You've, shorter," she said awkwardly. "You've gone." "By 18 inches, Paul replied. "Nice to think I've achieved something in the last 10 years, even if it's something a tree could have done much better." What she hadn't needed to say was, "Apart from that, you're exactly the same." Well, at least she had a degree of tact. Vorsprung durch Technik and all that. "Well," said little Paul, looking up at him, with an expression on his face that Paul had never seen in any mirror. "Here we are, then." "Yes," Paul said. "Not quite so cocky now, are we?" "No." Little Paul shrugged his thin shoulders. "Warned you it'd be scary, but you wouldn't listen. Full of it you were. Serves you right, don't you think?" "Yes." Little Paul smirked, and then stood up. "You people," he said, "read a few books, learn which end of the rifle the bullet comes out of, and you think you're bloody Siegfried. You're real hero. Now, this wouldn't faze him at all. He'd be all pissy because there's no blue plaque and guided tour." I didn't want to be a hero," Paul mumbled. "I only did the lessons and stuff because I've got to do 3 months in each department." Little Paul laughed. "It's all right," he said, and despite the height differential, he might as well have been patting Paul on the head. "It's not your fault. You're just going where you're sent, but it's pretty bloody obvious, isn't it? You aren't cut out for this sort of thing. They should have let you carry on dowsing for bauxite. You're good at that." "Am I?" Paul's eyes widened a little. "Really?" "Really, everybody's good at something, just like everybody can't be good at everything. It's okay. You just go back to your office and we'll say no more about it." That was so kind, so unbelievably generous that Paul wanted to cry. It was just like when he was small. People had always forgiven him eventually, no matter how thoughtless and inconsiderate he'd been, and he could never figure out why. He'd never deserved it. "Thank you," Paul said, suddenly remembering his manners. "I'm sorry," he added reflectively. "That's all right. You've learned your lesson." Something was snuffling around his ankles, and he could smell dog. 10 to 1 on that it was a tiny Yorkshire Terrier with a tartan collar and 3 heads. He'd always been frightened of dogs, even small ones, especially small ones. But this time he was glad it was there, because it meant he could go back. "Herr Carpenter Paul," Monica's voice. "I do not understand. What is the matter with you?" Herr Carpenter. With a jolt of shock, Paul realised that she meant him. Sorry, he said. What? It is only a small boy, she was saying. There is nothing to be afraid of. Why are you looking like that? Just for a split second, little Paul gave Monica a look that ought to have turned her to stone, but when he spoke, that crushing drawl was back. You want to go on? Fine, you go on. I'm warning you, though. This is ice cream and preachers compared to what's next. You might care to think about that before your four-wheeled friend here gets you into something you might regret. Worse than this? Impossible. But quite unexpectedly, Paul wasn't quite so sure anymore. True, he'd been here. He'd been here a very long time, and he'd only escaped because Mum and Dad had decided they'd earned their place in the sun, and had only taken with them the things they really wanted, like the mahogany chiffonier and Aunt Clara's china dogs. He'd escaped because he wasn't worth taking. He knew that, but he'd escaped. Suddenly he thought of Melts. When he'd started at senior school, his parents had told him that he didn't really want to see his old friends anymore. He'd be making new friends, nice boys and girls, not like the ones from round here. There'd been a day when he'd been up here with the polka dots and the perpetually tail-spinning hurricanes, and there'd been a knock at the front door. He'd heard Melts and her brother Jason. Did Paul want to come out to play? And Mum had said, sorry, but Paul's not here right now. And her voice had told them that Paul would never be there if they came asking for him again, and they'd gone away and had never come back. The nice boys and girls at senior school had seen him as a target, or not at all, and that had been his fault for not being outgoing and confident and charming like he was supposed to be. And so he stayed here instead, in his room, with his books and his models, and Paul is such a disappointment to us in some ways. But now Melts had come back, and she'd smiled at him. If it's all right with you, he heard himself saying, I think I'd like to go on now, please. Little Paul looked at him blankly for a moment, then shrugged. Fine, he said. If you think you can hack it, no skin off our nose. Thanks, Paul said, and almost before the word was out of his mouth, the faint glow of light outside the window had burst in and flooded the room. Paul shut his eyes as though he'd carelessly looked straight at a welding torch. Then he opened them again. It was an office. A very beautiful, very expensive office. Even the walls were carpeted, and woven into the pile was a monogram, J.W.W, intertwined like wrestling snakes. Somewhere a telephone was ringing, and Paul noticed it was making one long purr, American style, instead of the querulous British beep-beep. Through the window he could see the flat roofs of lesser skyscrapers, and beyond them a rocky hillside decorated with huge white letters. Oh no, he thought. A small girl wearing a Friends Forever t-shirt stood up from a luxurious leather armchair in the corner and curtsied mockingly as she pointed across the room. There, in matching chairs across a low, broad glass table, sat a lean, bronze, surfer-type young man and a dark, thin girl. He was drinking iced tea through a straw. She was absently reaming out her ear with her little finger. Paul only knew one person in the world who'd do a thing like that. Welcome to Hollywood, whispered the Friends Forever child maliciously. Where is this place? Monica was asking, but Paul ignored her. If he kept very still and quiet, he could just hear what the surfer and the thin girl were saying. And after I broke up with him, said the thin girl. Paul swung round looking for the child, but she disappeared. Reluctantly he turned back. The surfer was laughing at something apparently very funny. Sounds like a total loser, he said. Excuse me, but you're tasting guys. The thin girl smiled bleakly. Oh, it gets better, she said. After him came Paul. My God. She looked away for a moment, as if regaining her composure. That bad? Said the surfer. Worse. Really, really worse. Jesus! Absolutely. I mean, you've heard of Peter Pan, the little boy who didn't want to grow up. The surfer was nodding gravely, like a plastic novelty Aristotle. Like, talk about immature. Paul was Beaujolais Nouveau, and trying to talk to him was like juggling with custard. The surfer's lips thinned. Scared to commit, huh? The thin girl sighed and shook her head, and Paul thought, her hair never swayed like that when she was with me. I still don't know how I stuck it out for as long as I did. Like, I remember reading once this thing about an army officer, and in his report someone had written his men would follow him anywhere, but only out of curiosity. I think that's maybe how I put up with Paul all that time. I mean, it was fascinating to watch in a sick sort of way, and it was my fault too, let's be honest. She pulled her face. There was this love potion. It's a long story, and for some stupid reason I thought that maybe I could change him if I really loved him enough.
Oh, yeah, the surfer grinned. The famous J.W. love filter. But I thought it was like, forever.
That's what it says in the bottle, the thin girl replied. And I read up about it, and it never failed before, but then it never had to contend with Paul Carpenter. She laughed. They should bottle him and market him as the antidote. Actually, maybe that's why they hired him in the first place. I mean, there has to be a reason.
The surfer's chuckle was deep and somehow very distasteful, or so Paul thought. So, sounds like there's not much chance of you guys getting back together again, he said. But maybe I'm missing something here. If the guy's such a dork, why did you drink the love potion?
The grin she gave him was sad and guilty. Because I'm pathetic, I suppose. I mean, I'd just broken up with the other creep. No, wait, I'm losing count here. It was after the other creep turned out to be a goblin in disguise.
Bummer,
whispered the surfer. She nodded. Actually, he was a sort of off relation of Mr. Tanner, our mining and mineral rights partner. He'd disguised himself as a human and, well, her ears and the tip of her nose pinkened, seduced me, I guess. And it wasn't even because he fancied me. It was just part of some stupid office politics thing. You can imagine that didn't do my self-image a whole lot of good, and, well, there was Paul following me around like some kind of pathetic lost puppy, and I thought, the hell with it, let's be practical. I knew Paul was absolutely besotted with me, and if I took the potion, well, that'd be that taken care of and out of the way. I'd be in love with him forever and ever. I'd be able to cross finding true love off my list of things to do. It'd be one less pressure on me. She shook her head sadly. My parents' fault to a certain extent. I think they probably do love me, but they're always giving me that sad look. When are you going to settle down? Find yourself a nice young man. It's so much hassle having to deal with that day after day after day. That's why the love filter is such a great idea. Like arranged marriages, I guess. Only you can have the convenience and the not fussing, and true romance as well. Anyhow, that's why I did it, and probably it wouldn't have been such a bad idea, only it didn't work. I had to choose the one man in the universe who's such a colossal waste of space and resources. Even a love filter can't make intolerable. So I dumped him and came over here.
Paul looked away. Mostly he felt cold, as though he'd been lying in a snore for an hour.
Hey you, he said quietly. Elf. At once a small girl was standing beside him. We are not elves, she said angrily. Elves are Santa's little helpers. We are the Fae. Please bear that in mind if you enjoy breathing.
Paul pulled back his lips in a poor imitation of a smile. Oh, be quiet, he said. I just wanted to ask you, is there any reason why we've got to stay here, or can we get on? I mean, there's other things I could be doing, and if the look on the child's face was anything to go by, she was genuinely impressed.
You want to go on, she said, after hearing that?
Paul shrugged. I don't see what that's got to do with why I'm here, he said.
Are you stupid or something? The child raised her eyebrows. Look, maybe you're missing the point here. You've seen what we can do to you if we really want to, and you still want to carry on. Either you're really, really brave, or...
Paul smiled grimly. I know what I am, he said. Beating me up like this, well, I'm not exactly enjoying it, but you won't stop me this way. All you're really doing is telling me what a pathetic mess I am, and I knew that already.
Oh.
The child seemed rather taken aback.
So she told you, did she? About taking the potion?
Paul shook his head. But I'd guessed it had to be something like that. I mean, I had an idea she'd drunk the stupid thing. I thought it was by accident, but apparently not. Broad as it's long, so can we press on now, please? The child pulled a face.
Talk about a piece of work, it said. All right, but if you think this sucks...
You should have stuck with dragons and stuff, Paul interrupted. I'd almost certainly have run away from dragons. And this, he waved a hand vaguely towards the corner where the thin girl sat, is just stuff I live with every day.
Very brave, the child said mockingly. On the other hand, I've got a dictionary at home which says that brave is just another word for too stupid to get out of the way.
Paul couldn't be bothered to reply. It wasn't as though any of it mattered anyway. He'd known why Sophie had left him the moment he'd seen her letter. If this was the worst that the Fae could throw at him, that business with the light again. He opened his eyes and then closed them and opened them once more. Made no difference. Either it was very dark indeed wherever this was, or he'd gone blind. "Hello?" he mumbled. "Paul, is that you?" Benny's voice, but sounding uncharacteristically subdued. "Over here." Paul tried to walk to where the voice had come from, but something caught his foot and he staggered clumsily to his knees. "Benny!" he called out. Is it dark in here, or—"
"Yes," Benny replied. "Stay where you are. It's not worth trying to move about. The hell are you doing here, anyhow? Please don't tell me you're trying to rescue me."
"Well," Paul said. "Yes."
"Fuck," Benny replied. "Whose stupid idea was that, then?"
Paul didn't answer that. "What's happening?" he asked. "Where are we?"
"Dungeons," Benny said gloomily. "And that's about all I know. I asked you a question. Who sent you?"
"It was my idea," Paul said.
"Liar. Who was it? Was it Ricky Wormtoter? Did he manage to get out somehow?"
"Sorry," Paul replied. "I mean, no, I haven't seen any sight of him." He remembered something. "Isn't he supposed to be in here too?" he asked.
"Don't know," Benny replied. "I came down here to rescue him, but I've been here so long I'm losing track of everything. You do realise, don't you," he added, suddenly urgent, "we're stuck here for good. We aren't ever going to get out."
Paul was still too disoriented for that to mean anything. "What makes you say that?" he said. "I mean, they know we're here. The partners, the Countess and—"
"So she sent you?"
"Oh, all right, yes, she sent me, which means—" he plodded on. When I don't come back—" He tailed off. It was a moment before Benny spoke.
"When you don't come back," he said, "that's it. After that, there's nobody left. Haven't you got it yet? If Ricky Wormtoter's still in the cell next door, it means the whole fucking department's down here. All of us. There's nobody left up there to come after us."
A small, detached portion of Paul had to admit, well, yes, actually, a hell of a lot better than dragons. "But what about Mr. Tanner, or Professor Van Spee, or—"
"You clown," Benny snapped. "They can't do this sort of stuff. They aren't heroes. They couldn't get past the portal even if they wanted to, which they wouldn't. Haven't you worked it out yet? If any bloody fool of a sorcerer could do this job, we wouldn't be needed. It's a specialisation. Not everybody can do it. In fact, only a tiny handful."
Long silence. "I don't understand," Paul whimpered.
"Fine, then I will explain."
Paul took a step backwards. Even though it was pitch dark, he could feel Benny's anger building rapidly, like a motorway tailback.
"In order to do this bloody ridiculous stuff," he said, "you need a hero, right?"
Paul nodded, then remembered that Benny couldn't see him. Right," he said.
"And you're a hero. It says so in your personnel file, right after where it says no initiative, not a team player. Attitude leaves much to be desired. So it's a fact. Now you're thinking," Benny went on, "that it can't be true. You're not the hero type. And that's where your total and complete lack of a fucking clue betrays itself."
But it can't be true," Paul almost pleaded. "Come on, I should know."
"You don't know anything."
He could hear Benny forcing himself to calm down.
"Nobody ever said you were a great hero. Obviously you're not. You're a little tiny one. You know, faster than a speeding second-class letter. Leaps very small buildings in a single bound. But what the hell? A Pekingese is still a dog, right?"
Paul thought fleetingly of the little Yorkshire Terrier with its 3 heads. "All right," he said. I still don't quite see—"
"Then shut your face and let me tell you." Silence. Benny marshalling his thoughts. "Where you go wrong is you don't know what makes someone a hero. You think it's probably bulging muscles, superior weapon skills, trivial stuff like that. Well, you couldn't be more wrong if you tried. A hero's only got to be 2 things, brave and good. That's all."
In comparison, Paul thought, beating my head against a brick wall would be both productive and agreeable. But I'm not either," he whined.
"Fuck you, Carpenter. If I say you're good and brave, you're good and brave. Do you want me to explain, or don't you?"
Sorry."
"So you should be. And you are. Right. Where was I? Good and brave. Well, brave you can probably get your head round. But how about good? Do you have any idea what good means?
I used to think I did, Paul muttered.
Well, you don't. Here's something for you to think about. Would a good person deliberately do something that would mean unbearable lasting pain for those who love him most?
Said Paul. No?
Thank you. Now we're getting somewhere. How about brave? Can you do brave for me?
Paul nodded. Facing danger, he said.
Good. Nearly right, anyhow. Brave is facing up to stuff that you know is dangerous, because obviously, if you don't know that it's dangerous, it doesn't count. So, a brave guy is someone who does something even though he knows he could get killed, right?
I suppose so.
Fine.
Paul had never heard Benny sound so harsh, even in his manic drill instructor mode.
So you're a brave man, and you face the terrible danger, and you get killed. So what about people who love you? Family and kids and wives and girlfriends? Obviously, you're going to have to use a little imagination here, Carpenter. But how do you think they're going to feel when they hear you didn't make it this time? That you went chasing off to fight evil against overwhelming odds, knowing full well that you didn't have a chance, knowing full well they're these poor fools who love you, and you got yourself killed. What does that make you?
Paul thought about that. A bastard, he said.
Exactly. You just did something that would mean unbearable lasting pain for those who love you most. You put saving the world from some nebulous evil overlord, who's probably so crazy or so thick he'd have blown himself up anyway if only he'd been left alone, above the feelings of the people you owe most to, because they loved you. You thought more of saving a poor lost kitty stuck up a rickety tree than ruining the lives of everybody who ought to matter most to you. Are you a good man, or are you a reckless little shit? Rhetorical question, Benny said, because there can be only one answer, which is why, he went on, Kaz Studgewich can't come and rescue us because he's got an invalid sister who depends on him, and Theo Van Speed's got children and grandchildren, and Countess Judy's got a couple of dozen ex-husbands who'd self-destruct if anything happened to her, and even Dennis Tanner's got a mother. But the three of us, he laughed suddenly, us three sad bastards. Ricky Wormtoter's an orphan, and you can imagine why he has problems with lasting relationships. I've outlived all my relatives who were on speaking terms with me by a couple of centuries, and you, well, you don't need me to tell you. At your interview, the moment they set eyes on you, they knew, because who the hell would ever be upset if you went off one day and never came back?
It occurred to Paul to wonder whether the small child was somewhere in the cell with him, in the shadows where she couldn't be seen, grinning evilly and mouthing, "Told you so. Be a pity if she wasn't and missed all the fun." Right, he said quietly. I think I can see what you're getting at, but you're wrong.
Really? You think so?
Yes, Paul said firmly. I do. All right, Sophie may have dumped me, and she never cared about me anyway, and my mum and dad went off to Florida, and they never had much time for me, but that still doesn't mean they don't love me. I mean, don't love me at all. After all, I'm their son, and if anything happened to me... He wondered if he'd just said something funny, an unintentional pun. Maybe son was the dwarvish word for turnip or something.
I'm sorry, Benny said. I didn't mean to burst out laughing like that. I guess the stress is getting to me or something. But obviously you don't know, do you?
Paul sighed.
Not again.
Apparently not, he said. What's it this time?
Oh, well, can't do any more harm, I suppose. Like, it's not as if either of us is ever going to get out of here. And pretty soon we'll have other things on our minds beside the fact that...
Paul waited while Benny sorted out his train of thought.
What I mean to say is, if there was any chance that we'd escape and go on to lead normal, happy lives, and I wouldn't tell you this because it'd screw you up permanently, but since we're irretrievably fucked in any case, you might as well know. To cut along the story...
But Paul wasn't listening. Shut up, he snapped. Please, he added, remembering his manners. There, can you hear it?
Hear what?
Sort of a panting, snuffling noise.
Oh, I assumed that was you.
Couldn't be bothered replying to that. It's the dog, Paul said, the little dog with the tartan flea collar. He could feel the grin flooding across his face. They're letting us go.
Doubt it, Benny said, but Paul was down on his hands and knees, feeling for the source of the noise. He wasn't quite sure how it was supposed to work. Would the dog open a door for them, or lead them to the exit? Or did he have to grab hold of it, or what?
But hope, the one thing he'd felt sure he'd never feel again, was slushing about inside him like too much cherryade. If only he could find the dog. He found something, but he was pretty sure it wasn't the dog, and then someone slapped his face. Very, very hard. Oh, he said, sorry. Then someone called him something in German. He didn't have to be a linguist to get the general meaning. Monica, he said, is that you? Yeah, and if you do not take your hand away now, I will... Oh, he shoved his hand behind his back, where he devoutly hoped it would be out of the way. Monica, thank God, have you come to rescue us? Silence. Oh, Paul said again. It was my intention to rescue you, Monica said stiffly. However, I do not think I have succeeded. I think I have been captured too. It didn't help that Benny started roaring with laughter. It was too dark to see to kick him, however, so all Paul could do was hiss, "Shut up!" in what he hoped was the right direction. Sorry, he went on, now thoroughly confused as to where everybody was. It was really nice of you to try, though. It was nothing, Monica replied. It was my duty. I have failed. And then the snuffling noise started again, and Paul realised it hadn't been the dog, it just Monica crying. Marvellous, he thought. Serves her right, though, Benny was saying. That's the other complete bitch about love. Not only does it really hurt when the irresponsible bastard goes off and gets killed, it makes people do really stupid and dangerous things, like trying to rescue the loved one from the dungeons of the Fae. Stupider than which, he added savagely, is impossible to get outside of a general election. For a moment, Paul didn't understand at all. It didn't make sense. For one thing, Monica was a car. You mean, he said in a rather wobbly voice, you came here just to try and save... Yeah, what else could I do? Snuffle, whimper. I could not just leave him here. Monica, Paul started to say, and then the incongruous pronoun hit him like a meteorite. Unless, of course, she'd been talking to Benny, in which case... Fuck total darkness, he thought bitterly. It makes everything so bloody complicated. And now, Monica went on, it turns out that he's not even here. That is correct. Yes, she added. Paul said. Who do you mean? A snort from the middle distance. Ricky Wormtoter, you clown, Benny said. You don't think she came all this way just to keep you company, do you? Well, no, Paul thought. I suppose I didn't. Not in the part of my mind that deals with reality and stuff. Mr. Wormtoter, he repeated. He's your boyfriend. Howl of outrage with a pronounced German accent. He's not my boyfriend. He's my brother. Shit, Paul thought, and he wanted someone to blame, since it looked like he was now doomed to spend all eternity in a small dark place with someone he'd mortally offended. The only person he could think of to blame was Ricky Wormtoter for not having mentioned it. But he was forced to admit it wasn't the sort of thing that would crop up in casual conversation. Oh, and by the way, my sister's a 2-door hatchback. His nerves were now so thoroughly jangled he couldn't even apologise, and as far as Paul was concerned, saying sorry came slightly more naturally than breathing. I didn't know that, he said. It's quite all right, Monica said. With a lack of sincerity you could have carved into a second Mount Rushmore. He does not talk about it. He is ashamed. It is understandable. Paul, however, wasn't paying attention. Something about what he'd just learned was bothering him. A detail that didn't fit. He couldn't quite figure out what it was, but it was itching, a raspberry pip of doubt under his mind's dental plate. Now, perhaps, Monica said, they should leave. This time, Paul was sure that Benny was going to do himself an injury, he was laughing so much. That's right, he gasped between roars. Let's leave. Why didn't I think of that? It's such a good idea. Mr. Shumway, Monica said sternly, your behaviour is most inappropriate. It is not good manners to laugh so, and besides, I do not see what is so amusing. This is a serious matter. That more or less finished it as far as Benny was concerned. Paul could hear his boots clumping against the wall as he rolled on his back. I do not think Mr. Shumway is well, Monica said, raising her voice as to be heard. Perhaps it's the stress. I think maybe that you and I should be the ones to deal with the problem. Paul was beginning to see the joke himself. Fine by me, he said. What did you have in mind? Pause.
I was hoping you might have an idea, Monica said awkwardly. You are, after all, a qualified Übermensch. Surely the situation was covered in your basic training.
Not really, Paul said. Mostly it was more to do with killing things and stuff. I mean, how about you? He added hopefully. I mean, someone told me you were a proper sorceress before you got, before you joined the firm. What sort of thing did you do?
My field of specialization, do you mean? Herbal remedies and ecological magic. In Germany, I was the leading authority on turning disused industrial facilities into flower-carpeted meadows.
Oh, Paul said. I mean, that's really great, and I bet you were good at it. But before that, did you do all the trying out in various departments thing?
Yeah. I received vocational training in alchemical transformation, intermediate healing and maintenance, and repair of electrical and mechanical appliances. Also, I have an international baccalaureate in...
Fine, Paul said. So nothing that's going to be any help at all, and in that case we're screwed.
I can make a light,
Monica added hopefully. What? Right, that's good.
You would like me to make a light now?
Yes. He heard her mutter something, and then the shock of the burning amber glow made him feel dizzy, and he had to shut his eyes and look away. When he turned back, however, there was only a small glow, as if someone had lit a match. That's it, Paul asked. At least now he could see Monica nod.
The darkness in this room, it is very dicht, very dense, she amended. Or maybe tight, I'm not sure what is the best word. It makes a very great effort.
And then she yelped, as though the notional match had burned her fingers and the light went out.
I am sorry, she said.
It's all right, Paul said. You did fine, really.
Maybe in an hour I can try again.
No, really. No point, after all. The little pool of light had shown him nothing except her face, pale and drawn, and alarmingly worried. He'd suspected, ever since he'd found himself in the cell, that there was rather more to the darkness there than a simple absence of light. He could almost feel the pressure of it on his skin. Like I said, he went on. Oh, we're screwed. Pause.
You do not know how to proceed.
No, he laughed. Well, that's not true, actually. I know exactly what to do. All it'd take would be for me to find the wall by feel, and then I can get out the Acme portable door and set it up, and then we could just walk out of here back to the 70 St. Mary Axe, only I haven't got it anymore. Silence.
That, Monica said, is unfortunate.
Yes, Paul replied.
This door, do you know where it is?
Sort of. I lent it to... He stopped suddenly before he could finish the sentence. I lent it to your brother who's still missing, presumed captured. Fat lot of good the door did him, then. Anyway, he said, we can't use it. A surge of panic rose inside him, but he managed to fend it off. Benny, he said, Mr. Shumway, any ideas? Benny giggled.
Nope, he said. Well, one, we can stay here till we die of old age, unless they aren't planning on feeding us, in which case we'll be out of here in just over a week.
Paul didn't follow. You mean we slim down until we can crawl between the bars or something?
I was more thinking of starving to death, Benny replied. But they'll feed us, or they've put some hex on this place we don't need to eat. Letting us starve to death would be downright humanitarian as far as they're concerned, which describes them pretty well, of course.
Really?
Oh, yes. Great humanitarians, the Fae. Like, if you eat vegetables, you're a vegetarian. If you eat...
Mr. Carpenter, Monica interrupted. Who did you lend the portable door to?
Panic. I can't quite remember offhand. It was someone at the office.
Did you lend it to my brother?
Fuck, Paul thought.
Yes.
Ah, then it is all right. If Dietrich has the door, he will have escaped, which explains why he is not here. Once he finds out we have come here, he will return and rescue us, so there is nothing to worry about.
She sounded perfectly calm, as though she was holding a signed contract with God's signature on it.
We will wait for Dietrich to arrive, and everything will be fine.
At that, Benny Shumway started howling like a wolf. Ignore him, Paul said through gritted teeth. He'd never gritted his teeth before. It was actually a lot easier than he'd imagined. I'm sure you're right. Sooner or later...
Ah, Monica interrupted. That will be him now.
Benny broke off in mid-howl. Sure enough, something was happening. They could all hear a very faint buzzing noise, high and light and metallic, like an elven dentist drill at the end of a long corridor.
"What the hell is that?" Benny muttered. Paul and Monica shushed him simultaneously. The sound was definitely getting gradually louder, and now there was another noise as well. The muffled yapping of a small, angry dog. "Dietrich," said Monica smugly, but Paul thought, that can't be right. The door doesn't make a noise, or at least I can't remember anything like that. On the other hand, he'd never been in a place into which the door opened. He'd always been the one going through it, so maybe... The noise was very loud now, painfully loud in fact, though whether it was the volume or the pitch that was making his head swim, Paul wasn't sure, and didn't really care. He started shuffling on his backside away from the wall. That turned out to be a smart move a few seconds later when it imploded. Paul had no idea what hit him, though his best guess would have been either a brick or a chunk of stone. Whatever it was, it connected with the point of his left elbow, and it packed a solid punch. He couldn't hear himself scream over the clatter and thump of flying masonry, but he's fairly sure he had, and why not? If God hadn't meant us to scream, he wouldn't have given us horrendous pain. Then the noise stopped, and there was a moment of intense, eerie silence. It was still as dark as a bag, even though the wall had been taken out. There was absolutely nothing to see apart from the faint glimmer of a pair of red eyes. "Dietrich?" Monica said nervously. "Bist du da?" Red eyes, Paul thought. Then someone sniggered. If Paul had £1 for every time he'd heard that snigger, he could have afforded to quit work and join his parents in sunny Florida. In the past, it had always been profoundly annoying and most at his expense. This time, though, it was the loveliest sound he could possibly imagine. Rosie, he called out, "is that you?" Repeat snigger. The sound of a heavenly choir telling dirty jokes behind the celestial tabernacle. "Well, it's not that soft gate Ricky Wormtoter," said Mrs. Tanner's mum. "Heroes," she added scornfully, "couldn't bust their way into a bunny hutch with dynamite and jackhammers." For a moment, Paul thought Monica was going to start a fight, which was probably, Paul reckoned, why Mr. Tanner's mum had said it in the first place. But she confined herself to "Dietrich is not with you?" "Ella's like, 'Here, will one of you cop hold of this stupid dog? It just peed down my arm.'" Paul felt something wriggly and wet kicking against his chest. Fortunately, he overrode his instincts and grabbed it. It bit him. Thrice. Simultaneously. "How does this thing—" he shouted, as a snowstorm of white light caught him up and spun him away. Paul opened his eyes. Then someone smacked him round the face. He was getting used to that, so he didn't let it get to him. Besides, his attacker had also snatched the dog out of his arms, and that was definitely a good thing. The light hurt worse than the smack or the dog bites. Meanwhile, someone was calling him various names. "You the horrible man hurt Mummy's baby then," she was saying. "Nasty man." He looked up and saw the woman whose house the portal was in. She was scowling at him and holding the little three-headed Yorkie, which was twisting and writhing in her arms, clearly frantic to get at him and bite him some more. Not that he minded. Bugger me, he thought. I escaped. Bad pronoun. Not I. We. Where are the others? Sorry, he said. Have you seen my friends? A short bloke and a... The woman wasn't paying attention. Paul looked around the room, which seemed to be pretty much the same as when he had left it. Wagon wheel table, straw donkey, steel and canvas chair, even the empty mug he'd drunk from, except that the writing on it had changed from world's best grandad to dog-hating bastard. But there was nobody else in it apart from himself, the woman and the dog. Hell, Paul thought. Excuse me, he said over the dog's low growling, but I've got to go back. My friends, you see, they should have... But the woman shook her head. "Portal's closed," she snapped. "Doesn't open again till night tomorrow morning, and you're not using it again, not after what you did to Twinkle." There didn't seem to be any point in arguing, even if he kicked up a fuss or, unthinkable, tried to use force. He didn't know how the stupid thing worked, so hijacking it was out of the question, and the woman didn't look the sort who would be amenable to sweet reason or pathetic pleading. Also, he'd had about as much of the woman and her horrible little dog as he could take. Nothing for it but to go back to the office in the morning and hope that somebody there would know what to do. He felt awful about it, but at least failure was something he understood. He stood up, mumbled a further unheeded apology, and left. Outside, as he'd expected and dreaded, there was no sign of a maroon Volkswagen Polo. Paul stood for a while staring at the place where it had been, and then started to walk. He didn't know the way, of course. He had a rotten sense of direction, and Monica had done all the map reading to get them there.
He knew that there was a railway station in High Wycombe, but not where it was. Taxis presumably didn't happen out here. Some hero he turned out to be. Want a lift? She hadn't been there a moment ago. This time, just for a change, she was drop-dead gorgeous redhead. Usually she was a blonde or a brunette, and she was sitting in the driver's seat of a fire-apple red Porsche convertible. In spite of that, Paul was overjoyed to see her. "You're all right!" he shouted. I thought—" She grinned, and although her eyes were a bewitching emerald green, Paul realised that he much preferred them red. "You do a lot of that," she said. "Just as well I'm always there to save your ass. Do you want a lift or not?" He stayed where he was. "The others," he said. "Benny and Monica, what happened? Where are they?" Her eyes chilled a little. "3 gissies," she said. "I had my work cut out getting you past the defences, and I've only got 1 pair of claws, and before you say it, no, I'm not going back." "But you've got to." "No, I fucking haven't. I haven't got to do anything. I'm a goblin. We're shallow and self-centred. Also," she added, "we're not bloody heroes." She made the word sound faintly obscene. "Have you got the faintest idea where you've just been?" Still Paul didn't move. "We can't just leave them there," he said. She scowled, and the beautiful girl turned into a goblin. Even the Porsche turned into a larder, albeit a larder convertible. "You ungrateful little shit," she said. "For 2 pins I'd let you go back, only the portal's shut so you can't. Where you've just been," her green skin paled to khaki, "I don't even like thinking about it, and I'm a fucking goblin. You can get in or you can walk home. Doesn't matter to me." It occurred to Paul that he was being truly obnoxious. "I'm sorry," he said, "and thanks. It was really nice of me." She leered at him. "Just in light and self-interest, that's all, because one of these days—" Paul managed to keep the shudder from showing and opened the car door, glancing swiftly at the fuel gauge as he did so. The old running out of petrol in the middle of nowhere trick was hardly subtle, but neither was she. "Thanks anyway," he said. Time to change the subject. "So where was that place?" Mr. Tanner's mum started the engine and drove off. "I guess it's something of an honour," she said. "Not many people end up in the dungeons of the Castle of Grendel's Aunt, and nobody gets out again, ever, except you." "Grendel's?" She nodded and turned into a platinum blonde, probably absent-mindedness, though Paul knew she never gave up trying. "Like in Beowulf, yes. Grendel's mum's sister, the only one of the family that's left now, apart from a couple of distant cousins in Canada somewhere. Presumably she's got a name of her own, but everybody just calls her Grendel's aunt. Must be really annoying for her." Quite, Paul reflected, like being thought of as Mr. Tanner's mum. But how did she come into it? Why was Ricky Wormtoter? She shrugged. "Hero stuff, I suppose. Don't ask me. Maybe it's something to do with this stupid phase Civil War thing, or maybe it was just business. Nobody tells me anything, and I can't be asked to find out. Now, how about stopping off somewhere for dinner? I know this really nice pub just outside of Beaconsfield." "No," Paul said quickly. "Thanks," he added, "but really, I'd just like to get home, if that's all right. I'm really tired and—" "And you got a headache coming on," said Mr. Tanner's mum. "Yeah, right. Why do I get the idea you just don't trust me?" "Because I don't trust you," Paul said. "Sorry." She grinned. "You're a fool to yourself, you," she said. "But that's all right. When you get to my age, there's nothing gets the juices flowing like a challenge. Besides," she added, "you could probably do with an early night. After all, you'll have to explain to our Dennis in the morning how you managed to lose a company car." Paul hadn't thought of that aspect of the matter. "He'll understand, though, won't he? I mean, compared with losing Benny and—" She shook her head. "Where it costs the firm money, our Dennis never understands. If you're lucky, he'll just stop it out of your wages, in which case you might be able to afford a cup of tea sometime in the mid-2040s. Or he might get upset about it. You never know with our Dennis. Still, even that's better than being marooned in those dungeons." She hesitated for a moment. "Yep," she said. "On balance, it's got to be better. Less cramped for one thing." She was just kidding. Paul fervently hoped she was just kidding. Wasn't she? "It'll be all right," he said firmly. "Once I go back and rescue Monica and Benny—" "Dream on," Mr. Tanner's mum said. "You're hopeless, you are. Probably why I like you," she added, carelessly missing the gear lever with her hand and finding his knee instead. Paul yelped and she let go. "A romantic, I think the word is, Latin for idiot. No wonder they reckoned you'd make a good hero." Paul looked out of the window. "That's not what Benny told me," he said. "He told me they chose me because you can't be a hero if anybody missed you if they died. Is that what he said? Mr. Tanner's mum shrugged. I suppose I can see the sense in that. Me, though, I always thought that real hero's the sort of person who does all the risk-taking and sword-fighting and death-defying because he enjoys it. Part romantic like you, and part borderline psychopath only, she added. Your honest-to-God psycho enjoys killing because he likes blood or screams or whatever. That's not really the case for most of the heroes I've met. And I've met plenty, believe me. There's no real malice in them, no rage or anything like that. They just like the swirly capes and the white stallions and the jewel-hilted swords.
Ah, Paul said. More in sorrow than in anger, you mean?
Mr. Tanner's mum sighed. You want to walk back to London from here, you carry on. I'm trying to have a serious conversation.
Sorry.
I was trying to explain, she went on, why I don't think you're really cut out for the hero business. Not as a vocation, I mean, but I think you could be up to doing hero-type things if you really had to. Just not in cold blood, 9 to 5:30, 3 weeks holiday a year. I'm sorry I raised the subject, really.
Paul was quiet for a while, and then he said, Benny also told me he knew something really bad, something about my mum and dad, I think, but he didn't get round to it.
Mr. Tanner's mum frowned. Lucky escape, then.
But if it was something I ought to know...
She pulled a face. I know a bad thing about your parents. They had a moron for a son. Bloody hell, why would anyone want to hear something like that?
Academic, really, Paul replied. If Benny's stuck in there for good, I guess I'll never know.
Ignorance is bliss, Mr. Tanner's mum said sagely. Actually, I can think of a lot of things that splits, and ignorance doesn't even make the top 100, or even the top 100 that didn't involve live animals and raspberry jelly. Anyhow, the point is, you can pretty well guarantee that you're better off not knowing. Trust me. That word again.
This Civil War business, he said, as casually as he could manage. You wouldn't happen to know what it's about, would you?
She laughed. It's the Fae, she said. They don't need a reason. I'd stay well clear of them if I were you. Stick to goblins. So maybe we kill a human or two once in a while and hollow out their skulls for chamber pots. We don't mean anything by it. The Fae, though, it's different with them. It's always spite where they're concerned. Jealousy. Not liking that everyone else has got what they reckon they deserve. I heard someone say once that the Fae think insult and injury go together like Balti and Narn. This one's just not quite right without the other. They give me the creeps. If you want to know, she shrugged. Like it matters, she said. If the little fuckers want to have a war, bloody good luck to them, and I hope they wipe each other out.
You don't like them much, then?
Not a lot, no. But hey, there's worse things.
Paul could believe that, though it wasn't a comforting thought. I just wish, he said wearily, that I didn't have to get involved, that's all. I've got enough problems as it is. I don't need things like that in my life.
Chicken, Mr. Tanner's mum jeered. You don't know how lucky you are. Most men your age have got really scary stuff to contend with. Mortgages and pensions and commitment and the patter of tiny feet. All you've got to worry about is dragons and the Fae.
She dropped Paul off in the street outside his flat, and he managed to stop her following in without actually using violence, which was progress of a sort. It was only when he'd kicked off his shoes and flopped down on the sofa that he began thinking about some of the things he'd seen and heard that evening. Somehow, the absence of Sophie was worse than ever. He wanted to shout at her for the things she'd said, or burst into tears and snivel, but he couldn't. When he climbed into bed and turned off the light, he felt for a moment as though he was back in the dungeon cell, except that this time he was alone. He stuck it as long as he could, then switched the light back on and looked around for a book. Unfortunately, the only one he could reach without getting out of bed was the copy of Beowulf that Benny had lent him, and he really wasn't in the mood. He got up and made himself a cup of tea. No sugar left, and the milk had things floating on the top. Some hero, he thought. Sometime after 2 a.m, he fell asleep on the sofa and dreamed restlessly about 3-headed dogs and maroon Volkswagens and a hospital ward full of sleeping children who wouldn't wake up.